I used to think the ocean was the kindest neighbor you could ask for. Out here, at the very lip of Cliff Haven, the cliffs swallow the horizon and the wind and gulls talk more than people do. My property, what we call the land now, even though it's been in my family longer than the town itself, sits on a bluff fence with weather-blackened posts. There's a narrow lane that curves down to the old boathouse in the sea. You can stand at dawn and taste salt and kelp and think with a kind of quiet that only a horizon that big can give you. We kept things simple. My wife, Nora, grew the cold-tolerant heirloom tomatoes against the lee of the shed. I ran the boat for morning tourists and hauled lobster traps in the afternoon. On weekend, the community would drift down for chowder and a cup of Nora's coffee. Our kid grew up with a tide clock and a dog that treated every boat as a friend. For years, nobody asked us to paint the shed the approved coastal gray. Nobody wrote us polite little memos about curb appeal. Then Harborview Estates got built. They put in cedar facades, stone planters, and a private gravel promenade. The developer hired a designer who decided the town needed curation, and, as curation often does, it needed rules. They formed the Harborview Association, volunteers in short sleeves with clipboards and spreadsheets. They were the kind of people who measured hedges and measured backs of houses and thought that comfort came in a hex code. The first time I met Maris Lang, she came by like an official breeze, smiling, very practiced, wearing a windbreaker stitched with a Harborview crest. "Jonah Reed," she said, hand extended. "We'd love to bring your land into the neighborhood program, seasonal markets, an artisan pier pop-up. We have funding." She had a brochure with an aerial drone photo of my beach printed on it like it belonged to her. I told her no. "We do our own things," I said. "We've always done our own things." But she kept visiting. Polite calls, polite emails, and one afternoon a basket of muffins too perfectly arranged, with a card that read, "For our future partner on the point." I put the card in the drawer, the muffins in the compost, and shoved the brochure in with the bills. When she couldn't sweeten me, she began to reframe the land between our property line and the promenade as something fragile that must be guarded from unregulated uses. That's how civil aggression dresses itself. Concern first, then pressure, and finally obligation. People who looked at her smiled. People who lived by their own hands frowned and tended to their own work. Rumors started. Not direct things. At first, just the sort of whispers that fill the spaces between polite smiles. It's a shame about the clutter on that lane. It attracted the wrong crowd. Nora said not to listen, that rules are the comfort blanket of people who have never had to bail a net at dawn. I agreed. I thought ignoring it would starve it. I was wrong. The morning of the storm, if I can call it that, started like any other. I was patching the tar on the dinghy when my phone buzzed. An odd message from my neighbor Pete. "You hosting a concert Saturday?" I frowned. "Nope." I typed back. Then the deluge of pings, locals, even the pastor, asking if they could help with setup. By the time noon hit, my inbox looked like an RSVP list for an event I never approved. The image that kept surfacing had a bright sunburst and a logo, Cliff Haven Summer Bash, free lawn concert, seafood, kids rides. Saturday, 10 a.m. The Reed Shore, my land, the lane, the boathouse, all printed in bold. Nora put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Someone mess with you." We scrolled to the supposed event page. Comments, excited shares, people tagging friends. I reported the page. Facebook sent back an automated shrug. "Thanks for reporting. We'll review it." Great. By 7 a.m. the next day, headlights stitched through the fog at the bottom of our lane. My gate was closed. It always is. People fanned out with folding chairs and coolers and a kind of entitlement that thinks a closed gate is merely a suggestion. They parked on the roadside and tramped onto the bluff. Kids squealed by the rock pools. Someone strummed a guitar. A man with a speaker set up by the boathouse. I walked down the lane, hands in my pockets, feeling each footstep like an accusation. "Hey, friend," said a wide man in a Harborview polo shirt. "This is where the party is, right? The Reeds always throw the best bashies." He sounded like he'd read a brochure and been told it was gospel. "There's no party," I said. "This is private property. Please leave." We came out for this. Free food. A woman carrying a thermos snapped a photo of my locked gate like it was evidence of my cruelty. The crowd was patient at first. Then someone told a little kid that they could feed the ducks. Kids dashed across a scramble of rocks toward the water, and that's when a guy decided to drive a pickup straight across my lower pasture. Tires tore into the salt grass like a plow scaring ghosts. "Stop! You're tearing my land." I ran forward, breath heavy. The pickup stopped. A man in a beat-up had leaned out and waved like we were old acquaintances. "Your place is perfect," he said, like he was complimenting a painting he planned to deface. Then the catastrophe. Someone kid misjudged the slick algae on the stone shelf and slipped. A terrible sound. The small body collapsing. The gasp that carries like a bell. Blood on bare knees. Then a higher panic. The crowd's mood flipped from picnic to accusation in a single frightened heartbeat. Someone swore I had lured them there. Someone else pulled out a phone and started filming. "Is trying to run them off," a voice cried. I called 911. "We have an unauthorized gathering. Someone's been injured on my property." The sirens came slower than you want. By the time the sheriff arrived, it was a full-blown mess of nerves and politics. People were shouting about false advertising. Someone demanded my ID. I handed it over, hands shaking. The sheriff took my name and deed, then looked me in the eye and said, "You filed a report?" "Yes, I filed it online last night." "You still could be in trouble," he said. "There's an injury and there's a narrative forming." And that was a word, narrative. In the age of phones, narrative moves faster than facts. By noon, our lane had its own hashtag. My brother, Cal, a soft-spoken coder who prefers servers to weather, drove up that night carrying black coffee and a grave face. He'd been combing network logs at his desk. "It's not random," he said before he sat down. "This event was posted from an account created just 3 nights ago, and the IP traces. The origin hops through a public Wi-Fi node at the Harborview Association office." He didn't need to say what I already guessed. He left his laptop open. The screenshot of the Harborview login page sat there like a smoking gun. We found other things. A draft flyer saved to a shared drive with Maris's name on the metadata, a timestamp of her log session at 2:17 p.m., the day before the event went live. I stared at that timestamp until my eyes crossed. It had to be her, or someone with keys to her network. I could feel the grip of that same old helplessness that rolls over you when you realize you're not just in a fight about a gate, but about how a town thinks of you. The first legal letter arrived in a white envelope with a gold seal that said Messrs. Hall and Briggs, attorneys for the Garrisons, the family of the injured boy. They requested an immediate meeting about negligence. A second envelope, thinner, from Harborview's lawyers, was a different sort of legal posture. Cease and desist any public accusations against Harborview Association and Ms. Maris Lang. They called my social post defamatory and demanded retraction. It felt like being squeezed from both sides of a vice. The Garrisons were hurt, and their pain needed someone to put a face to it. The Harborview people were afraid of consequences. Both used law like a battering ram. My wife stayed steady. "We're not going to bury our heads," Nora said. "We document. We file. We don't fight angry with angry." So we did. We hired May Hall, a lawyer whose voice sounded like someone who'd read law as a blade and used it for defense. May looked at the evidence, then at me, then at the photograph of Maris in the Marina newsletter. "We'll do 2 things," she said. "We'll sue for the fabricated event and the damages, and we'll defend against the negligence claim. Facts matter here. The record will show the gate, the signs, and that you contacted authorities." Court felt like being flayed slowly in public. The local paper showed up on day 1 like seagulls colliding into a bait bucket. Maris arrived with an entourage, women in nice jackets and men who smiled like they'd rehearsed it. She said she'd been planning a community engagement initiative. She said she never intended anything to be posted live. Her voice was flat, in the way practice denial often is. Her lawyer said that a rogue volunteer, not Ms. Lang, must have press publish. But the internet keeps its receipts. Subpoenas produce an email sent from Maris's account to a design contractor with a subject line, "Saturday, show event?" Attached, a mock-up with the same logo. Under cross-examination, the contractor admitted Maris had asked for the flyer to be more appealing and that he'd uploaded a final version to Harborview's shared web folder at her request. The uploaded file had been accessed by a machine in the Harborview office on the morning the event went live. You can feel your heart crawl into your throat in the courtroom. Maris's smile evaporated not because she was suddenly contrite, but because the machinery of evidence started turning, and her spokespeople's narratives had gaps. Her face went slack. I could tell she'd not prepared for that. Her lawyer whispered. She tried to claim she never touched the publish button, and maybe she didn't. But the email chain made it impossible to claim she'd had no role in the conception and approval of the content. The Garrison's lawyer threw a theatrical twist into the day after that. He tried to pin the injury on me. Why were there no volunteers directing traffic? Why did Mr. Reed not post a safety notice at the lower beach? He produced images of the injured child and asked in that predatory tone that wants to make the jury ache. May add photographs of our gate, locked, of signed space at proper intervals, and text logs documenting the time I'd called the sheriff. I'd reported it hours earlier, when I first saw the event. The judge more or less looked at both sides and said, there are multiple responsible parties. It was damning in its evenness. We settled. The Harborview Association agreed to pay damages, cover legal fees, and issue a public apology. Maris was forced to step down. There was probation and mandatory community accountability training, an odd phrase for what it essentially was, a program to teach people how not to weaponize community systems against neighbors. The Garrisons accepted a modest settlement from Harborview's insurance fund, and the town signed a sort of mutual release. Nobody really won big, except the truth now had a paper trail, and the narrative machine coughed. After the dust settled, we did the practical things. We installed cameras along the bluff and a keypad at the lane. I felt a little ridiculous standing next to a keypad, like some sea-stained James Bond who'd given up on gadgets. But practicality is a kind of armor, and Nora liked armor if it came in neat, sensible packages. We posted clear event policies on our own site and required bookings. We began to take online security seriously. Cal, who had been my quiet champion through all of it, built an incident page showing IP traces and a timeline for anyone who wanted to review the evidence. Where the story turned, and what surprised me most, was how other people reached across their own fences. When I started telling the tale quietly at the co-op, other farmers and small landowners began to call. Someone tried to force our hand about clotheslines. Our association complained about our free-range chickens. They sent screenshots, angry emails, and resignation letters. Their stories became a chorus. It felt less like a private struggle and more like an exposed seam in a community sweater that had been wearing thin for a while. So we did a small, stubbornly practical thing. We set up the Coastal Roots Fund, an emergency legal defense pool for small property owners dealing with harassment, false claims, and association overreach. We launched it humbly with money from the settlement and donation from neighbors who'd been quietly waiting for someone to start something. Cal built the donation portal and even a small blog that compiled best practices, how to manage event listings, how to lock down Wi-Fi, how to preserve metadata, how to document communications. We didn't make this political, we made it procedural. People who had once tut-tutted at our unpainted shed started showing up with casseroles and offers to speak on panels. The Garrisons came to one of the fundraisers and shook my hand. "Is doing fine," their father said quietly. "We're just glad someone did something, so this didn't happen to someone else." 2 months after the trial, we opened our lane, on our terms, for a small, booked weekend market. It was nothing like the fabricated shore bash that had nearly toppled us. There was a hand-painted sign, a modest tent with chowder, Nora's coffee, and a stack of waivers. People signed, paid, and left with jars of jam and a little sense that the world can be both brittle and repairable. If you ask me whether I forgave Maris, that's complicated. Forgiveness is a kind of private weather. I'm not sure I ever felt the particular warmth of it for her. What I learned, and what I tell other people when they ask, is that the point isn't forgiveness. The point is setting the boundary and making sure no one else walks across it as if it were their right. When you have land, when you have roots, there are people who will wish to prune your life into a shape that better fits them. You can either let them prune you, or you can learn how to splice a branch back on. Sometimes the town still murmurs about the fight. Some people said I went overboard with security. Others say I'd have done nothing and ended up bankrupt and lonely. Both have grains of truth. We added cameras, but we also opened our doors in a way that was safe and orderly. We got the apology in the paper. Not a photo, just the ink word saying Harborview regretted the confusion and harm caused by the unauthorized event. I tacked that apology next to a local feature that called our place a stubborn, salt-bleached refuge. Nora laughed whenever she passes the wall. "You're making it a museum," she said. "You're proud of being attacked and winning." I am proud in a way I didn't expect to be. Proud not because I enjoy the courtroom or like the headlines, but because we turned a wrong into something that helps someone who's 10 years from now dealing with a petty neighbor or bigger, stranger injustice. That's what the fund is for. Bail for the small fights, a legal line in a world where people can weaponize kindness. There are days I drive the boat alone at sunrise, and I think about the kid who slipped that day and the fear in his mother's face as she hurried him into the car. I think about Mary sitting in court with her mouth folded in a way that can't be practiced. I think about the way community is both a shelter and a tool. I think about the gales that come from the sea and the fact that after each storm, the beach is different. So when I tell this story now on the porch as a gulls wheel and the tide slides past the rocks, I finish the same way I did back then. Don't mistake a fence for an invitation. Draw your lines. Guard your gates. And when someone tries to turn your life into a trending story, plant facts as deep as pilings and make it stick. We grow things here. Seaweed, tomatoes, stubborn kindness. And when the town tries to trim us into something smaller that fits its picture, we'll learn how to hold a salt gate closed and how to lend it to neighbors when they need refuge. That's the only grace left that matters. The will to keep what you built, and the willingness to turn a small victory into a bigger one for everyone else. If you ever come down our lane, Nora will give you coffee and probably ask you to sign the waiver. But you'll get the chowder and you'll see the sign that says Coastal Roots Fund, helping keep local places local. We pin the apology clipping on the wall beside it, not as a trophy, but as a map, because sometimes maps are what help people find their way home. And that's all. Don't mess with the people who work at dawn. We know how to face wind and tide, and if you push us too far, we'll learn how to push back. We're not violent about it. We're stubborn. We grow things. We fix things. And if someone tries to steal what you love with a flyer and a hashtag, plant the truth deep enough that it takes root.